Hi there. February 20th, 2021. I'm sorry for all of you who are suffering from very cold weather. That's actually not happening here in Southern California. It's not really super warm, but it's not cold. I want to start out by thanking two of the commenters. I mean, I love the comments that you send, but Michael Patrick Milligan and Carrie Thompson made a good comment to me. They're both from Utah, and last week I was referring to an interview that Senator Mike Lee had with Greg Kelly on Newsmax, and I was just frustrated, and I spouted off, and I ended up calling Senator Lee a rhino and an idiot, whatever. And it was a good lesson to me. And I thank you too, both for how you commented, and it's a good way, the way you criticized me. It was very gentle, but it was just pointing out how you felt differently. And that's how we learn. And what I learned from that is I didn't have enough information. I was reacting in the moment to my frustration. And I shouldn't have said that. And as Michael pointed out, he said he's a good conservative senator. And they both like him. And so he's not like my favorite. I mean, I still am frustrated when those that don't fight back more. But we have plenty of, of rhinos we can criticize. So thank you for that. I appreciate it, and I learned. And here's another thing. You know, when you're on video and you're speaking, I realize that you can make mistakes. I mean, obviously you can make mistakes. So most of the items that I discuss, I have spent a lot of time thinking about, most of the time. And so, you know, for example, on the whole climate alarmism issue, I mean, I've done a lot of reading on that. Health issues, a lot on that. So I have a history, but on some things I don't, and I can, in the moment, say something. So I was listening to Jordan Peterson, and he was interviewing Gad Saad, and I'm reading his book, which is very good. So I thought, oh, I'll listen to this interview. And I just started listening to it, and I had to turn it off. And frankly, it upset me. And that was, I guess, an attempt to show that he's not biased. I don't know what. But Jordan Peterson started talking about the U.S. election. He said, well, there's conspiracy theorists on the right, too. You know, because they were talking about more the conspiracy theorists on the left. But there's conspiracy theories on the right, Jordan Peterson said. And what he was referring to was conspiracy theories regarding the November election. And he must have just read something in the mainstream media. He clearly didn't look at the evidence. I mean, there's so much evidence, whether it be that Time magazine article, the Navarro reports, all of the information that Rudy Giuliani collected, the testimonies. You know, I listened to the Senate testimonies. I listened to all those people. And he apparently just read something, because I didn't listen too long because it was very bothersome that he even went there. But what he said was something like, well, you know, to posit this kind of big conspiracy, you know, that's just, you know, kind of implication is crazy thinking. And now I know Jordan Peterson has been through a lot. He nearly died. But one of the things I had always loved about Jordan Peterson was his clear, concise thinking. So he did kind of what I did with Senator Mike Lee. He expressed an opinion without really knowing what he was talking about. And it upset me for about a day. Just thinking about that. because he didn't just tar Trump and whoever he thinks, but all of the people. And he didn't know anything about it. He's a Canadian. And he just had this thought, well, how could there be this conspiracy? So anyway, thank you, Michael and Carrie. I appreciate that. And as far as all the social media outlets and what's happening there, I'm actually waiting to see how it all shakes out. Because, like I encourage all of you, know yourself. I'm not one that wants to try all these different things. I don't want to spend too much time on it. I have other things I want to do. So I'm going to wait and see how it all shakes out. It looks like Rumble's going to be pretty good. I'll be putting my videos on that when I need to. By the way, this is the first time in a while that I haven't been decremented 10 subscribers. So maybe YouTube isn't doing that right now. I'm still at 2.69K. We'll see if they do it, because I was noticing a 10 subscriber decrement every single time I put up a video. Now, some of the things I'm going to talk about today, there's a lot of interesting things. That's one of the reasons why I'm doing this video. I love having the option of not doing the video, but this, I mean, that kind of frees me, but this is exciting. So one of the things I'm really going to encourage all of us is don't use the left's language. I mean, think about, oh, we're not that we're using this, but think about what they called what happened on January 6th. It's an insurrection. I mean, how crazy is that? How crazy is that? So they just keep saying that term. But the terms I'm particularly thinking about, because I see this on the right, I see this a lot, never refer to carbon dioxide as a pollutant. It is not a pollutant. It is absolutely vital, necessary for life on this planet. And I'm going to talk about that because I don't think people appreciate how important carbon dioxide is and how dangerously low our carbon dioxide emissions not emissions, but levels on planet Earth have gotten. Because plants need it. They absolutely need it. And I'm going to talk about that. But meanwhile, never call it, oh, you know, why should we rejoin the Paris Climate Accord because our carbon pollution is less or whatever. No, it's not pollution. I know what pollution is. It's smog. It's unhealthy air. And it has really been cleaned up in California, for example. It was so bad in California. I mean, I came to Southern California in 1977 after I got out of the Air Force. And it was, oh God, we had gas lines, we had the OPEC embargo stuff going on, and it was just depressingly smoggy in the summer. Depressingly smoggy. We don't have that now. And then when my late husband Harold came to Los Angeles in 1948, he said it was horribly, horribly smoggy. So that's smog, that's air. And when you look at China, whenever they're talking about carbon pollution, which we don't use that term, people, we don't use that term, they'll show pictures of smog, not the same thing. And don't confuse that with coal, because you can have scrubbers on coal. There's a lot of things you can do. You can have a very nice coal-fired power plant that doesn't put out smog. We know how to do that. So that's one of the languages that I think it's very important to recognize. The other one is renewables. They're not renewables. They're unreliables. And he claims somebody else had said it earlier, but the person who's really popularized that is Alex Epstein. Now, I'm actually going to play a short video of some of what he said. It's very short. It was an interview with Ben Shapiro, because he's been all over the news in talking about what happened in Texas. I mean, we like to make fun of the wind turbines that were frozen, but that wasn't so much the issue. The issue was you put a big strain, because when the weather is bad, not just that they freeze, but that the wind doesn't blow. So if you're relying on renewables, when the wind doesn't blow and the sun's not shining or snow is covering solar panels, you don't have that. It's not there. So then you put this tremendous strain on the rest of the system. And if you do not focus your efforts, and this is very true in California as well, on reliability and resilience in terms of electrical power, we're in trouble, people. We're going to have this sort of thing happen over and over again. We've had rolling blackouts in California. I mean, we had the fires caused by Pacific Gas and Electric Company further north, but that was because they weren't putting priority on maintenance, on reliability, on those electrical wires. You have to, I mean, in my mind, everything to do with electrical power should be focused on the fact that when we need it, we should have it, period. And we particularly need it during extreme weather, okay? We need it. So, I think it's funny, not funny, but let me just say one thing about ad hoc. That means after the fact. When you try to take something like, oh, extreme weather, oh, that's caused by climate change. No matter what the weather is, they say it's climate change. These ad hoc explanations are not science. That's not science. Science is you can predict. You can make a prediction and you can reliably do it. So let's just talk about what are we able to do with weather and climate models? We've gotten pretty good at maybe 7 to 10 days out. And one of the reasons is every time they do, the weather people, do a prediction with the models, you see how you're wrong, right? Well, it's supposed to rain, or you're supposed to have this, and it doesn't happen. So we've gotten better, because when I was a kid, if they said it's going to rain tomorrow, I mean, they were off a lot. But usually if they say it's going to rain tomorrow, that doesn't happen as much now. You can feel fairly confident that the weather predictions, let's say for a week out, are pretty good. And one of the reasons is the models that they're using, they can continually say, oh, we did that wrong, and so you can fix it. So you're getting this constant feedback. You're not getting that constant feedback when you say have a climate model that projects 50 years in the future. You're going to be long gone. So we should never, ever, ever rely on these long-term models. And we've been doing this long enough, and Tony Heller's the best on this, which you can get him on YouTube, newtube.com. But others have done it. It's laughable, the predictions that were made. You know, when I first started getting interested in this issue in the 1990s, you know, your kids are never going to see snow, there's going to be this. But here's the interesting thing, and they got this from NOAA. Now, that's the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. It's a government thing, which unfortunately we haven't been able, even during Trump's term in office, we weren't able to get all those people out. But on January 21st, that's like a month ago, now the Weather Channel tweeted this, but they got the information from NOAA. They showed that we were going to have, February is expected to be warmer than average across much of the U.S. And they particularly showed the area around Texas as being warmer than average. for now. I mean, how wrong can you be? Completely wrong, the wrong direction. I mean, I just think it's a shame. I don't know what they're doing with these models, but they're so bad they can't do a month out. They can't do a month out. So I saw that on Tony Heller's YouTube video, and also on What's like Watt, WATTS, What's Up With That.com. I get their newsletter, and they talk and analyze, kind of mostly from an engineering point of view, various things like that. So they have no ability to predict. They don't know what the weather's going to be. And that's one of the reasons why I'm a little concerned, people thinking, well, it's going to get warmer, that we're not preparing for that. What is it they think? We're going to have this nice weather? Now, the other thing, as I've mentioned many times before, that I really, really don't like about renewables is how ruinous they are for the environment. Oh, excuse me, unreliables. I gotta keep to my new language. What I don't like about it, it just takes up so much space because it's diffuse. It's not a concentrated source of energy. So what we want is a concentrated source of energy. And we want reliability. In my mind, and the mind of many others, you should never use these unreliables for base load power. That means your basic power that you need. Don't use it for that. I mean, use it for little supplemental things like, I don't know, solar panel for some traffic lights maybe as a backup. I know when I used to go regularly to South Africa, and I was out on that farm, the sheep farm, where I look at the stars in the Karoo, they had windmills, you know. They were Afrikaners, but they were originally, those people were from Holland. And so they had windmills, and that would help get the water out of the well to feed the, you know, so that the sheep would have water. So things like that, that's a good place to have unreliables, because you're going to have the water come out. But to depend on that for your baseload power is horrible. And one of the things to keep in mind is if you have really bad weather, and it doesn't have to freeze the wind turbines, all you have to do is just not have the wind blow. And it's not there. The power is not there. I like the way President Trump used to joke about that at his rallies. Oh, honey, you know, can't watch TV tonight or whatever because the wind's not blowing. So he made a joke out of it to make the point. But to rely, and the thing is, what we've done is we've incentivized that, whether it be through tax credits and various other things. Oh, and let me mention something about electric cars. Why would you want an electric car? Because there's been a push in a lot of places to kind of electrify everything, so you're reliant on the grid. Now, part of resilience is to get your stuff from different sources. Like I've done that, right? I have gasoline in my car. I have a backup generator that runs off natural gas. I also have natural gas to light my stove, but I also have electrical power. So I'm kind of getting it from different sources. So if one goes down, I can get the power somewhere else. So I've made my own situation resilient. But you don't want to do that. So I mentioned my friend Tom, but he was talking about, because he drives a lot, like to Albuquerque or places like that, and he pointed out that another thing, because you know one of the problems with electric cars is the range. But you have to also realize, and I hadn't thought about this aspect, but every time you run the heating in the car, or you run the air conditioning, you drain the battery. He also talked about the fact, but I argued back that, well, we'll fix this eventually somehow. But right now, you really cannot extinguish a lithium hydride, what's in the battery's fire. And you can't get out. So you actually have to since the doors are electric, you have to have special handles so you can bypass it. I mean, that's just kind of creepy. I mean, these things can burn. I think eventually we'll fix that, but remember, batteries don't operate well. Like when they're cold or maybe too hot, I don't know about that one. But he drives from LA to Albuquerque, and he says you don't see any Teslas on the road. And there's no way to recharge. I mean, even if you built the rechargers, why would people do that? Why would you want to wait and wait and wait? And he was saying that, you know, even if you had rechargers, it would pretty much at least double his driving time. Who's going to want to do that if you're taking a road trip? So, I mean, electric cars, I don't want an electric car. Don't mandate electric cars. Don't think that's a solution. It's not. Now, somebody, you know, if you have just a few electric cars on the road, you know, then you don't have all these people waiting in line to get recharged. Whatever. And they're kind of like an exclusive club because they drive a Tesla. Okay, I'm going to talk to you about Alex Epstein. Because let me tell you something about Alex Epstein. He wrote The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels. He's a young guy, kind of a philosopher, but really a clear thinker. And he has taught himself so much about the energy economy and what goes on. And one of the ways he did it was that he interviewed people. He had a podcast. And so if there was a long time where I would listen to the podcasts, I was doing a lot of hiking at that time, so, you know, I'd have it in my ear, and I listened to podcasts of the people that he would interview, and they were all these interesting people, you know, like Judith Curry and others, and many of them had written a book. So that's how I really built up my library on this whole issue, because what they were saying was so fascinating and made so much sense to me that I would then read their book and go into more detail. So I've done a lot on this issue, and I have Alex Epstein to thank for that. Now he's got this channel which doesn't have a lot of views called Improve the Planet. I just don't know why he picked that title, because it makes it sound greeny, kind of new agey, but that's his choice. But he was interviewed on Ben Shapiro. So it's a short interview, but of course now, because he's been tweeting about it and he's so knowledgeable about it, but I want to point out a few things because I think it's very important that we know this, because we are headed down this path unless we stop it. Definitely in California, but oh my God, other places in the country. I mean, Texas is supposed to be cool. I mean, look at all these Californians that are going to Texas. Well, why would you want to go to Texas when they have the grid problems that we have in California? I mean, it's just nuts, people.
We're joined on the line by Alex Epstein. He's an energy expert who argues that human flourishing should be the guiding principle of energy and environmental progress, author of the New York Times bestseller, The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels, and the creator of EnergyTalkingPoints.com, a source for well-referenced talking points on energy, environmental, and climate issues. You can follow him on Twitter at Alex Epstein. Alex, thanks so much for joining the show. Really appreciate it.
Hey, great to be here.
So, Alex, let's talk about what the heck is going on in Texas. The media obviously have a very large stake in claiming that what is going on in Texas is the fault of, I guess, reliable sources of energy.
So what's interesting, and this is one of the reasons why I wanted to play this for you instead of just having you listen to it, so I can give my commentary. What Ben Shapiro is pointing out is the whole green New Deal type people are scrambling to make the case this had nothing to do with the unreliable energy. That it's a fossil fuels. I mean, it makes no sense, okay? So you have to understand where they're coming from. So if you read these articles and you think, well, yeah, it was because of that or whatever. What Alex points out in this, that's very important, is that when the unreliables went away, that puts a tremendous strain on the remaining fossil fuels. And they've been shutting down coal-fired power plants. Another thing I learned from this is that even the natural gas plants, you can only go so fast through those pipelines. Now, you can heat the pipeline, but you can have problems with pipelines. But natural gas and nuclear, coal and nuclear, have the fuel on site. So those would not go down. We know how to have reliable energy when the most extreme weather events. So keep in mind as you listen.
That it's coal, it's natural gas, it's nuclear power. That really, apparently, what the world needs is more windmills. I'm not kidding. The Washington Post wrote an editorial saying that what just happened in Texas proves the need for a Green New Deal. I cannot imagine something stupider than that, given that the windmills completely failed in Texas. Can you explain what exactly happened in Texas? Because failure has many parents, but the solution is clearly not what they're talking about here.
Right. I think it's important to note what happened around the country, which is basically it got cold in a lot of places. In every single place it got cold, there was a common trend. Wind and solar went totally out to lunch. And it's not just that the wind turbines froze. That's a very minor thing. It's that the wind wasn't blowing. That's why I call wind and solar unreliables, because they're not there often when you need them the most. So what happened?
That's a very important point. They're not there when you need them the most. So it's fun to make fun of the other side when the frozen windmills, yeah, that's an issue. But also the wind was not blowing. So when they use these terms on the other side, the people who are promoting these things, because there's a lot of money in it for them, when they're promoting it, they'll say, oh, they get 25% of their energy from, but that's only when the wind's blowing. You can't count on it. Only the solar panels, only when the sun is shining. You can't count on it. So I don't want to live in a third world country. We are so dependent on electrical power. It's shocking to me, not shocking, I shouldn't say shocking, I don't want to be like that. But it's like we have a good thing and we just like, oh, I want to be green, let's just get rid of it. It's like, think, okay? Let's just screw everything up, okay?
Is that nuclear and fossil fuels, what I call the reliables, they were doing all the heavy lifting everywhere in the country. I've posted this on Twitter. You can look anywhere, the Northeast, New England, New York, Midwest, Southwest, everywhere. Fossil fuels are the atlas that's holding up our country.
So the fossil fuels and nuclear, where it was available, they are doing all the heavy lifting. That's the key point. He talks so fast, so does Ben Shapiro. And I want to make sure we don't miss this point. They were doing the heavy lifting. By the way, I'll pin this I'll pin this video, short video, so some of you can subscribe to Alex Epstein, because he has these long discussions, and this shows where his site is. And you can listen to this yourself.
And that is also true in Texas. If you look at what happened in Texas, fossil fuels were dramatically ramping up. Wind had been dominant in Texas like a week before, and so natural gas was low. And then natural gas heroically ramped up to these enormous levels. That's the most flexible source of power. And then you see a crash. But you see the crash is a crash of natural gas mostly. But where were wind and solar? They were even more out to lunch. And so if you look at the chronology of this, it's not fully understood, but the root cause is very clear. America is having systemic problems with reliability. We know more than ever about how to generate reliable electricity, but we have less reliable electricity than ever, including where I live in California. And the reason is because policy today rewards unreliability and punishes reliability. That is the fundamental. That's
a very key point. The policies we're forcing the utilities, we're saying you get like extra points or whatever by putting in these renewables, because we have all these renewable mandates. They don't penalize them for reliability issues. They don't make reliability a priority. That has to be the priority. So this is absolutely key.
Causing systemic problems.
It's pretty amazing to watch as the media spin this, because their spin has been, well, wind doesn't really comprise that much of Texas's energy in the first place. So if wind fails, then it's really only going to hurt them like a little. But if all of the other sources of energy fail, then it's going to hurt them a lot. Well, there's a counter side to that, which is you're asking the reliable sources of energy, as you put it, to pick up all the slack for the failure of wind and solar, and you haven't built anything new in those areas, particularly when it comes to coal plants, for a very, very long time, but nuclear plants as well.
Yeah, you've shut down coal plants, and I posted on Twitter the statistics. It's super scary.
Okay, I'll stop there. I'm halfway through this, but I will post this video so you can listen to it because they get into it. But yeah, you're forcing the others to take up the slack when there's extreme weather. I mean, if there's any kind of extreme weather, whether it be super hot, you want air conditioning. When it's super cold, you want heating. You also just want electricity, that gives you clean water. It's so fundamental. And now you've got people who are reliant on Zoom calls and getting their information. Okay, I think I've said enough on that issue. Let me just say something too about Ben Shapiro. Because I was struck when I first started listening sometimes to Ben Shapiro. I like the way he talks. He was this whole climate alarmism thing. I don't agree with it. And I thought, good for you. But then he heard Roy Spencer of the University of Alabama say, well, probably the recent warming, maybe half of it is due to carbon dioxide emissions. And Ben Shapiro took that as a fact, basically. And he changed his tune that yes, we have carbon dioxide emissions are causing global warming. Like, not as much as people think, but here's what I want to point out about that. If you want to stay in the game, this is what I've observed in a whole host of areas. If you want to stay in the game, and Roy Spencer is in the game, and still writing and talking on climate issues and getting paid for it in, I guess, the University of Alabama. If you want to stay in the game, you can't go full bore. So by saying that, he's still saying, oh yeah, carbon dioxide does cause. I mean, he just, when somebody says 50%, that's just a guess. He has no evidence to support that. We don't know. We don't know. But Ben Shapiro took it as, oh, well, he's not an alarmist and he said that, so that's a fact. So when you're getting information from someone who's inside and has to support something for whatever reason, don't necessarily take it as a fact. I mean, if they have nothing to lose, if they don't care if they get criticized and they've looked into it, then maybe it's good, maybe it's not. You still have to evaluate it. But I'm reminded, and I think I've told this story before somewhere, but when I was at the Pentagon, as you know, I served in the first Clinton administration as a Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Command, Control, and Communications. But one of the things I was looking at, because when I was hired by Bill Perry, who was the Deputy Secretary of Defense, I said, I'm a little concerned about your congressional testimony in support of Millstar because I'm not sure if I think that's a good idea. He said, oh, Deborah, no, I'm not saying, I'm just saying we need to look at that. I mean, he actually liked it that I made that point. Because Millstar was, at the time, a very expensive, very hardened satellite and very low data rates. Because, in case we had a nuclear war, they wanted to be able to communicate, but at the low data rates, it was kind of useless. So when I got the job, Bill Perry told me, I want you to look into this. So I was inundated with briefings and people and whatever. But one of the things, so I was known that I was going to advise on this issue. Now the Air Force wasn't that keen on it because it came out of their budget, but the Navy loved it and the Army loved it because they got it for free. So that's when I learned that, oh my God, there's all these kernels and their PowerPoint presentations. there's just too many people at the Pentagon just wasting our taxpayer money. They're not war fighters, they're not out in the field. But one of the ways I protected myself was by talking a lot about the discus satellite system. That was an X-band satellite system it was kind of a workhorse satellite system for the military, for military purposes. So that whole band was not, I don't know what the status is now, but it was not allowed from any civilian or commercial use. So that said, by me pointing out how the importance of discus and future discus satellites, and it gave me cover, let's put it that way. So I wasn't just somebody going in there and wanting to get rid of the military satellite systems. No, I was arguing that we need higher data rates. I kept focusing on we need higher data rates. And we could get that through discus and, of course, through the use of commercial satellites. So suppose somebody had looked at me and took my pronouncements on the discus satellite system as gospel or whatever. Oh, Ms. Castleman says, discus satellites are this or that. Not understanding that I had to promote that in order to make my point about Milstar. And I see this a lot, okay? I see this, unfortunately, after Trump became unpopular in certain circles after January 6th, and he was so viciously attacked. Look at all the people who turned on him in Washington. I mean, I put a little sign on my refrigerator, Lord, forgive them, for they know not what they do. I felt such a betrayal that they deserted our president with this made-up stuff, like Chad Wolf at Homeland Security, acting home. He just said, see ya, and he left. Heather McDonald wrote a big article in the City Journal. It's like, what? Everything you stand for, Trump supported. And yet you're going to diss on him now? And Betsy DeVos left early. So all the things that Trump supported about what she was trying to do in education. But see, I think what they were doing is saying, look, I'm not all that bad because I don't like what Trump did. Because they jumped on that to protect themselves, to still give them credibility when they talked. Now, unfortunately, they don't have that much credibility with me because that's just chicken. I don't like it. But it does help explain kind of what they were doing. You see, if you still want to keep credibility, I did that in all my Caltech meetings. I was so into the science. I clearly love science. I would do all my homework and I'd express support about the science, and everybody knew I loved science. There was no question in anybody's mind. And many people told me how much they liked having me there, including the presenters, because I paid attention to every word and I listened and I loved it. So then when I spoke out about my hesitancy about the climate alarmism, I did get some traction there. Because if I was just questioning everything, that's bogus, that's bogus, that's bogus, and clearly not liking science, they could write me off. So just remember that when you hear someone, like Dr. Drew, I heard him on some interview, because he's been, because he didn't come out completely about COVID orthodoxy, he's had something taken down. I don't remember what it is, but anyway, he's had some difficulties. But when I heard him talk, he was saying some things about, he likes Dr. Fauci and this and that, and I thought, he's trying to get back in some good graces, okay? Because there's a lot to not like about Dr. Fauci. So just remember that. When you listen to people, don't take their words completely at face value. If they want to play in the game, they have to find a way to be okay, to not be seen and attacked. That's why the ones who are completely unafraid, I just adore those people. That's why I love Tony Heller. He knows his stuff and he is completely unafraid. And he can do it. And he's not afraid. And there are others that are like that. And those are really, really my kind of people. Because that takes a lot of courage. I mean, I noticed even as I was listening to Alex Epstein, who's totally cool. I never heard him say anything favorable about President Trump. The best thing he did was he at least didn't say anything negative. Like I'm thinking with these other people, okay, just don't bring it up. Heather McDonald, don't write that article, okay? Just say I don't know enough about it. Just don't talk about it. But don't get up there and diss on that person when you don't even know what happened. You don't know what happened. And you're just falling for all the lies. I mean, I even noticed this. Take someone like Thomas Sowell. Brilliant, brilliant man. By the way, there's like a good movie on his life on YouTube and on Amazon Prime. But his latest book, and he was having an interview about it, like he's like 94, amazing man. And it's called Charter Schools and Their Enemies. And he's talking about the importance of charter schools. Well, you know, President Trump and his administration was promoting that. So I was really surprised. I shouldn't have been surprised, but at the end of the interview, somebody said, well, you know, how do you feel about President Trump versus, you know, Joe Biden or something? And he basically said, well, I don't really have an opinion or whatever, but he didn't speak out for President Trump. And I'm like, what? Biden has openly said he supports the teachers' unions, and we're going to get rid of basically charter schools. How could you not support President Trump in the re-election? But now I realize why. Because in the circles that he runs in, he doesn't want to be tagged a Trump supporter. Because that's like being a climate denier to some circles. They'll put that label on you. So that's why he does it. So when you hear people, I mean, that helps me a little bit understand what they're doing. Because I do have to fight feelings of betrayal and disappointment. Now there's one other thing well, there's more than one other thing I want to talk about. I'll talk about carbon dioxide in a minute and why carbon dioxide is so important. But before I do that, because I don't want to miss this, the whole recall effort against Governor Gavin Newsom of California is going pretty well. They pretty much have the votes they need for recall, but they want to get a few more before the deadline. The deadline is actually March 17th, but they're going to submit it March 9th. Because you always want to have more signatures, because you've got to go through and some signatures won't be valid for some reason or another. So I was listening to Tom Del Baccaro of RescueCalifornia.org. There's a bunch of organizations, and I've already sent in my signature. But he was on Steve Bannon 2 days in a row. Their goal is to get 2 million signatures. They now have like 1.6 million, maybe more now. But all that was needed was 1.495 million. And we're raising money, so I sent some money, just $100. But I thought, gotta do my part. But here's the interesting thing about this. California, it's very, very, very hard to get a Republican into high office. The way it's set up now, since 2010, I think it was, where the two top vote getters, I mean, literally, sometimes you cannot get a Republican, even on the ballot. But in 2003, we had Governor Gray Davis. He was a Republican, or maybe, I don't remember what he was. I think he was a Republican, maybe he was a Democrat, sorry. But he got recalled. And the interesting thing about when somebody gets recalled, it's very easy to get somebody else in. I mean, it's very easy. They just have to be on the ballot. So here's what's going to happen, and probably in August, there'll be an election, and there'll be two questions. Should Gavin Newsom be recalled? Yes, no. Number two, if yes, who from the list below should replace him? So we don't have to do this thing where, oh my God, all the Republicans have to agree to support this one candidate. Whoever gets the most votes will become the governor. And here's the interesting thing. That's going to be a heavily dominated Republican field. And why is that? Because any strong Democrat, what are they going to do? Because you would have to have ads. You'd have to advertise yourself ahead of time. And that would be seen for those who continue to support Governor Newsom. Pretty boy Newsom, I call him. They would appear to be disloyal. So there's not going to be really a good Democrat on the list. So I was talking to my niece Lindsay about this, and she was talking about, sorry Lindsay, I don't recall the man's name, some guy who was talking, and she really liked his policies, his beliefs, and he could be good. But what I urge people to think about, and this goes for the presidential candidates, it's not enough to say, I like the way this person thinks. I like their policies. That's okay, I call it a sine qua non. That means, in Latin, I think, without which not. But it means, yes, that's the first step, but that's not enough. You have to say to yourself, can they get those policies implemented? They could have great policies, but then they could just go flounder once they get in office. So I'm interested mostly in people who understand how Sacramento works, how do they get things passed, how do they get policies. So maybe if they've run, certainly if they've, like there's a mayor in San Diego, but he's kind of a rhino type. And he's way too much about spending money on homeless. But he would certainly be better. I want somebody who's focused on the business in California, and get us off of these horrible green policy, unreliable energy issues, because I don't want these rolling blackouts. And are we planning for when we have the next Santa Ana winds? What are we doing there? Are we just gonna have more fires? What are our plans? These things we know happen in California. What are our plans to take care of it? So, as the date approaches of August, particularly if it looks like it's definitely going to be on the ballot, then we can evaluate who the people are. And I think we'll be able to get somebody in. Now, we'll still have the legislature be horrible, because that's heavily, heavily Democratic. But it's kind of exciting, and at least on Steve Bannon's show, what they were talking about is California could be the forerunner of other states doing the same kind of thing, where they're not going to wait for an election, because Gavin Newsom would be up for re-election in 2022. But again, it's super hard to get a Republican in, super hard. But just whoever is top of the list. So that's exciting. So I wanted to mention that because I didn't want to run out of time. But one of the things I want to talk about, just briefly, again, I really, really, really want to recommend this book. Patrick Moore. Super good. Now, and it's really about the importance of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere. Now, there's a really, really smart guy. He's getting on He was born, I looked him up on Wikipedia, Carver Mead. He was born in 1934. And super, super smart guy. Very independent in his thinking, and he's well known for a lot of things. And let me tell you, at Caltech, he's spoken of with great reverence. Great reverence. But I would say, for example, he's credited by Gordon Moore with coining the term Moore's Law. Excuse me. And he was really what they called very large-scale integrated circuits. He's just done so many things. It was kind of interesting reading the many pages of his Wikipedia. But he's spoken of with great reverence. And I remember Harold gave a talk at Caltech talking about how to create synthetic fuels from coal. And, because this is when we were worried about not having enough gasoline. And Carver Mead had the keynote that night, and he weaved some of Harold's points, because he listened and he paid attention and he cut the key points, and he weaved some of those conclusions into his keynote. Harold thought that was pretty cool. Also when they had the Distinguished Alumnus Awards, both Carver Mead had gotten it, I think in 2002 or something like that, and also he had gotten the National Medal of Technology, both two things that Harold has had, the National Medal of Technology and, Caltech Distinguished Alumnus. So we were at the luncheon, and this was the last time Harold went, and he had recovered somewhat from whatever his kind of stroke was. I say because we never went to the doctor, so I don't know exactly what it was. But Harold kind of needed to hold on to somebody's arm when he was walking. And Carver Mead just listened and wanted to talk with Harold. And he because then they had to go get the group picture. And he said, well, I'll take care of Harold. He was like honored to hold Harold's arm. And I was touched by that. I really liked him for that. But I think it was in 2016 maybe, before Harold had a stroke. But anyway, I went to an electrical engineering symposium, and I got to sit next to Carver Mead at this dinner. I was like at the head table. I was like, oh, this is cool. And then there was a really high-level guy at JPL there. I won't say his name. But it was so cool, because I don't know how we got on the subject of climate alarmism, but I started spouting off my opinion, and they agreed with me. And I thought, this is Caltech. This is so cool. This is so cool. But here's the thing. They don't want to do anything about it after they talked with me. Because I went we could form a Caltech group, or Caltech JPL group. But you have to understand, they got to live in that environment. They don't want to do it. But anyway, Carver Mead, and he had been a teacher for many years. So he talked to me about the carbon cycle and the importance of carbon and how basically it had been locked up in the earth. And Patrick Moore talks about this. And that finally, with the burning of fossil fuels, we've released it and we've improved the carbon dioxide levels somewhat in the atmosphere. And he explained it really well. And then, like a good instructor, he said, okay, now you explain to me what I just said. And fortunately, I was thinking, well, and I did. And he goes, you got it. And then he said to me when we left, he said, just keep doing what you're doing, meaning speaking out. So that was interesting to me. Now, you could say, well, he was not a climate scientist. No, but he was a very, very smart person who had looked into it himself. So I was kind of hoping, I sent him an email later, I was hoping we could get together and discuss it more, but he wasn't interested in doing that. And I understand why. Because he's beloved at Caltech. If he took this on, he'd get labeled. So you can't, it was just something he felt. So he was saying, you keep doing it, but I'm not going to do it. Okay. Then I'm just going to read you a few things out of this book for those that, I mean, there's a lot of good stuff in this book. Okay. During the last glacial maximum, 20,000 years ago, CO2 fell to about 180 parts per million. Now you might think, what does that mean? Okay, that means out of 1,000,000 parts, there's 180. Now, when you exhale, it's like 38,000 parts per million. Okay? 38,000. So plants need, if it gets to 150 parts per million, it's not enough for plants to do photosynthesis. It's bad. It's bad. So we had been dropping. So he points out that even at, right now we're at 415 parts per million. Now remember Al Gore and those people, they formed a group called 350.org, meaning, oh my God, we're now at 350, or we should go back to 350. No, we need more, because plants are still limited in how much they can grow. That's why in greenhouses, they actually add CO2 to make the plants grow. So it's a limiting factor, our low CO2 levels. So all commercial greenhouse growers pay for bottled CO2 or purchase CO2 generators that convert natural gas or propane into carbon dioxide. The optimal level of CO2 in a greenhouse has to take into account both crop yield and optimum economics. So they pretty much get it up to about 1,000 parts per million, okay? He says between 800 and 1,200 parts per million for most greenhouse gases. That's what the growers do. The plants still do better if you get up to like 2,000 parts per million, but the economics of it, of buying the CO2, it's only a marginal increase. So there's diminishing returns once you get to 1,000 parts per million. Okay, so that's one thing. Another thing to realize is that our oceans contain 45 times as much CO2 as the atmosphere. I mean, because when we talk about CO2 emissions, we're talking about the atmosphere, but it's the oceans. 45 times as much. I mean, the oceans, and that's why when temperatures go up and the oceans get warmer, they outgas the CO2. When temperatures drop, the oceans suck up the CO2. So that's why, like when Al Gore in The Inconvenient Truth showed that, as temperature, that if CO2 levels go up, temperature levels go up, he actually switched the two parts of the graph. Because if you look more carefully at the data, it's about an 800-year lag. In other words, the temperature goes up, more CO2 gets outgassed, and you have more CO2 in the atmosphere. 800 years later. So it's confusing cause and effect. But one of the things he points out here, we are at the tail end of a 150 million year decline of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And he goes in, and mostly it's because of rocks, but it's also because of fossil fuels being done, okay? But one of the things to think about here is the life processes of the earth were sucking the CO2 out of the atmosphere and out of the oceans, because the plankton and other things, I could read you all the details, but let me just do it in a big picture way, have been sucking it out of the atmosphere, sucking it out of the oceans. Not good for plants. But then humans came along. Now for those of you who have like a religious feeling about this stuff, we humans are saving the planet. We're not hurting the planet. We are saving the planet by releasing what was buried. Remember, fossil fuels, what does that mean? Fossils, animals, life got buried, and rocks, limestone, whatever. So we're releasing it. We're fixing it. That's why, just as an easy number to remember, we should be at 1,000 parts per million. Far from CO2 being a pollutant, CO2 is vital to life on Earth, okay? What are we teaching our children? This use of, oh, we gotta lower CO2 emissions. No, we need to up them. We got it completely backwards. You know, there's so many areas where we get things completely backwards. That's been really a strange phenomenon that I've come across in my life, okay? But just know that CO2 is vital for life, and we should not denigrate it, but rather increase our emissions of CO2, period. He even talks about, like, if we continue to use fossil fuels, in a couple centuries, we'll kind of release all of those. But even as we're releasing it, all the different species and plankton and whatever, I mean, you can read the book, are still taking it out of the air. So he says centuries from now, we're going to have a way to continue to release it. And one of the ways you do it is cement production. Because about 5% of our CO2 emissions right now are from cement production. Because so much of it's locked up in the rocks. But the point is, anybody who's talking about taking CO2 out of the air, because we could do that. We could do that. And we could even make that cost effective. No, please don't do that. Don't do that. We need to increase. So anyway, I highly recommend you read this book. He has a few minor errors in it, and maybe he'll get better. I got a copy of the book for Robert because Robert's interested in reading it. I said, Robert, don't write him off because he makes a few errors. Like he said, the Cambrian was 570 million years ago. Well, no, it's 541 million years ago, beginning of the Cambrian period. And also when he talked about Milankovitch cycles, I noticed he didn't really explain the third one very well. So in areas that he knows a little bit less about, he was tiny bit sloppy. But the stuff he knows about, right on. Now, that's only just because I'm a stickler for accuracy. So those are minor, but I know how Robert works, how I work. Really, they find an error and they write you off. They write you off. It's like, oh, you made a mistake there, so maybe made a mistake. But see, he covers so many things in this. So there are some areas where he's just like copying something out, like the Milankovitch cycles. But I've studied the Milankovitch cycles. By the way, that's what causes the glaciers to go back and forth. There's happened 24 times in the last 2.5 million years. I mean, we are in an ice age. Pleistocene ice age, period, people. We're in an ice age. That's why in the 70s they were worried that the ice age was starting up again, because most of these interglacials, meaning between ice ages, when the glaciers recede, most of them are like 10,000 years. Well, it's been about 10,000 years. So I've read a whole book about how having agriculture, like rice farming in Asia, that actually released some carbon dioxide may be making things just a little bit warmer and we're holding off the ice age. Whatever. That's one of the things that got me started. And I'm going to end with just some thoughts I've had about the brain. I call it the brain. Remember, whatever the first thought that pops in your head, you are not responsible for that. But be curious. Why did that thought pop into your head? And another thing is our brains will go to elaborate lengths to protect us. And that's what's called hidden agendas. And so I'm trying to remove hidden agendas from my brain and to notice what they are and work on them. But I find it interesting, you know, a lot of us have read, I don't know, Larry Elder, Dinesh D'Souza, and all of these that have pointed out how the Democratic Party has been the party of racism. Even in the 60s and the 70s, how they really hurt minorities. But you know, they're still the party of racism. Because what are they doing when they showed a two-tiered process of justice? They're putting these images in our head of rioters and looters getting away with horrible things. And when you see that they're minorities, that's coming into your head. And it's seeping in. So whenever I see that, I stop it. I say, no, I know almost everybody in minority communities, they want law and order. These are just a few bad actors. Because if you just kind of let it come in, that kind of creates a sort of a racism. It can. You got to be careful. You got to stop it. Don't let that get into your head. Here's another one. I just noticed. You know, I've always supported law enforcement, FBI, but you know, I've been hearing so many bad things about the FBI, how they're questioning. I mean, they've been horrible, okay? But I'm sure there's people in the FBI that are doing good things. So I heard that a couple FBI agents were killed by a bad actor. And the first thing that popped in my head was like, FBI, whew. And I thought, whoa. The FBI are now the bad guys in my head. And then when I heard the story, it was like, oh my God, they were going after a child pornography ring. I mean, these were good FBI agents, but I was not fascinated, but whatever the word is, that was the first thought that popped in my head. Now again, I'm not responsible for that. I'm responsible for what I do with it. Like if I went around saying, good, yeah, okay? But I'm not doing that. It's terrible that they were killed. It's a tragedy. But that was the first thought. The FBI is ruining its reputation with the American people. Because if it happens to me, I'm sure there's others. Ruining their reputation with the American people. Instead of being proud of the FBI, I mean, this is bad. And the left and the Democrats and the mainstream media are causing this. Oh, and I want to say one more thing, which is interesting. I'm actually feeling pretty positive. You know, President Trump has been kind of quiet lately, but one of the things that's happening is I think it's a good idea that he's kind of quiet. Because now, oh my God, the Democrats are just like starting to go after each other because Trump isn't there anymore. And Facebook and Twitter, they're going to have problems in other areas of the world. Now, Facebook, I mean, the arrogance of these people. So they're getting involved in other governments. You can't do this, you can't. Like, Facebook actually thinks it can take on this Australian government. But what they don't realize, these idiots, I'll call them idiots, they are idiots. Pipsqueak idiots in Silicon Valley who just, I think they went to their head that they could ban the president of the United States. So now they can go around the world and do this sort of thing. But it's not just Australia. Other countries are watching and going, whoa, 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 whoa. So this is all going to play out. And now they can't talk about Trump right now. So let's enjoy the ride, folks. Let's enjoy the ride. I think we're going to fix a lot of this. And I don't think this is a terrible time in our country. I mean, you can if you want, but I'm not thinking that. There were bad times before. Different. This is just different. This is bad in a different way. But it's not worse. I think it was worse before. I think this is the best time to be alive. It's just a new set of problems that we have to fight. But we know what it is. Let's do it. Let's keep ourselves up. And I didn't mention this last time, but I'm going to close with this. This is something I discovered. And I actually wrote this in my journal. Okay? This is February 17th, 2017. So it was less than a month after my husband passed away. And so, as for the grief thing, one of the things that kind of helped me is I tried to, because I said everybody goes through grief, everybody. And so one of the things that helped me is I tried to look on it as a scientist, like, what's happening to me? But here's what I wrote. There's a similarity between ongoing pain, like physical pain, and ongoing grief. If I totally get into it, it makes it feel unbearable. In the case of pain, it's when that desperate feeling arises that I need for this to go away now. So give me a painkiller. I need more. I need more. In other words, you're looking for something outside yourself to say, I can't bear it. I need more painkiller. I need more. And that actually makes the pain worse. It's interesting how that works, but it does. Instead, the physical pain is better tolerated if I accept it, even if I take some sort of painkiller. So one of the things I would do, like if I took an ibuprofen, I would talk to the ibuprofen. Okay, I know I have pain, but I'm just taking this, but I'm not putting everything on this. And I wouldn't mentally demand that it cease. So I also found that this happened one time, and it was like unbearable. If I let myself fully cry, fully feel the loss of Harold, okay, like, oh my God, I'm never going to see him again. I mean, this wonderful man that had been in my life for a third of a century. If I kind of let myself go there, a desperation arises within me that makes it worse. I mean, I just couldn't go there. Don't go through to the worst part of it. On the other hand, if I resolutely turn my mind to other things while repeating, one of my affirmations, makes it better. So I was rereading my journal, I came across that, and I wanted to, maybe that will help you sometime too. Don't demand that it go away. If you're just feeling horrible about something, whatever it is, don't go there completely, okay? Don't demand that it cease. Because if you demand that it cease, you're giving in the power to that, and it becomes unbearable. I'll probably do it next week, but we'll see. Meanwhile, you all take care of yourself. This was fun. Bye.